Thank you all for attending this morning, the Digital Health Panel. We're very excited to have you here and our esteemed panelists. I'm going to turn it over to Krishna Haller, who is the president of Raymond Ohio Group, and he's moderating this panel. And there'll be some time for questions and answers afterwards. Thank you for coming.
All right, thank you, Julia. I've been working probably in mobile health for about 7 years now in different forms, mostly on the development side, but also on the business model and development side. So this is an area of particular interest for me. I think it kind of set the context for the people in the audience. I think it'd be good if each one of we took the opportunity to introduce yourselves and your company and what you do. So why don't we start down on the end, Katya?
Okay, morning everyone. I'm Katya Hancock. I'm the Director of Partnerships at Startup Health. Startup Health is a global platform and academy for digital health entrepreneurs. Our mission is really to help transform healthcare by building 1,000 healthcare companies over the next decade. So we really believe that entrepreneurs are extremely well equipped and positioned to help transform healthcare. They're able to be more creative and strategic and nimble, and they're unencumbered by large, corporate policies and whatnot. And so by empowering them and building a platform to help them accelerate their business over a 3-year program, and by connecting them to a network of the stakeholders in healthcare, we can really help make a difference in building scalable businesses that will help transform healthcare.
Great. Hi everyone, my name is Leah Sparks. I'm co-founder and CEO of Wildflower Health. We deliver smartphone-enabled clinical programs that identify and engage targeted health populations and help those people use their smartphone to take actions that are connected to the healthcare system. Our first product is called Due Date Plus, and it's targeted at pregnant women, and it helps identify women in early pregnancy, stratify women who are high risk, and like I said, take actions in the healthcare system. So tap into resources available through their health plan, find a provider in their local area that's high quality, and our clients are the healthcare enterprises themselves.
Thanks. Klaus?
Yeah, my name is Klaus Stöckemann. I'm one of the managing partners of Peppermint Venture Partners based in Europe, in Berlin. And we have a venture fund dedicated to medical devices and connected health, or mHealth. That's our focus, and of course Berlin, as you probably have known, is quite interesting in terms of IT and mHealth startups, but we'll come to that later.
I'm Michelle Longmire. I'm CEO and founder of Medable. I'm also a physician, and I was very excited by all of the changes that are going on in digital health, but noticing that as a physician, really these changes, aside from an kind of out-of-date EHR, weren't impacting my clinical practice. And so I founded Medable with some enterprise developers who were from Salesforce to create an enterprise platform that really enabled existing digital health applications to go the last mile, to basically share that data with doctors and make it EHR compatible. So we have a platform at medable.com with an API that enables applications such as what Leah does for Due Date Plus, for that data to reach physicians, be physician accessible, and enter an electronic health record.
All right, thank you. I think the other thing I think is important to do in order to set the context is mHealth, mobile health, almost means everything, to the point that if you're not careful, it means nothing. And so what I think would be useful for us and for the audience is maybe we could go back in the reverse order and talk about what do you think mHealth means, and for the context of the discussion today.
Sure. I mean, I think that when we think about mHealth, we envision something different than the traditional healthcare system, where as a patient, you walk into the doctor's office, that's the first interaction you have with the healthcare system, and then you leave and you pick up your prescription from a pharmacy, right? So that's the traditional. I think mHealth is transformation along any aspect of that kind of traditional paradigm, from information being received by your physician prior to a visit, to true digital health, whereby you never see the physician in person and you actually have all of your care rendered digitally, something we refer to as digital doctoring. So I think of it from a physician's perspective in delivering care that's more efficient and enhanced by digital technology.
Okay. Klaus, what's your view on this?
Yeah, there are, I think, a lot of views on it. For us, it's basically connecting stakeholders in the healthcare system, and because it's digital, it's getting much easier to do so across borders and also between devices, and that's actually what we are interested in. that we have devices which are intelligent or smart. They can carry data, they can document data, and then they can share it among the stakeholder groups. That's the reason why we more thinking to call it connected health in a way, because the mHealth thing also include purely app application. But I think we will come to a differentiation between app application and device mHealth/mHealth application. So for us, most important thing is connecting stakeholders to the benefit of the whole system.
Yeah, good question. I think to be considered mHealth, you have to tap into the power of whatever you mean, what it means to be mobile. And to us, the power is really the real-time access. Because it's mobile, you have all the personalization opportunities and the data capture opportunities. And clearly, we're at the very early stages of defining this ecosystem, right? Applications are where a lot of people are starting, taking advantage of the things on the phone, but we all know this whole area is going to explode, and it's hard to even know what the future holds. But I think that's what's so exciting about this space, and I think all the innovations will hopefully build on these aspects of being real-time, capturing the data, being truly personalized for the user to make healthcare more efficient, and that's, I think, the goal of mHealth.
Right.
Yeah, I think you're right. mHealth is an extremely broad term. It means so many things to so many people, but as all of these new solutions are emerging and new technologies are popping up, just constantly, more and more each year, I think back to what Klaus was saying, the connected layer that's sort of emerging is really going to be the key thing to define mHealth and create a more holistic view of a patient and connected healthcare. So as all these devices pop up and different solutions where you can input data and data is being created, the real important factor of mHealth is, how can we connect them together to create more of a patient profile and then hopefully connect that to EMRs and things like that and to the provider side. But from a consumer standpoint, a patient standpoint, mHealth is really when you have a holistic, and this is where we think it's going, where you have a holistic health picture, brought together by all of these great new technologies that are coming out.
Okay, Kaya, let's stick with you here for a minute. I know that you've been doing a lot of looking at the magnitude, the size of the market, and where is that today, and where do you think that's going?
Well, the digital health market in general is, I'm sure everyone in the room is aware, is pretty much exploding. At Startup Health, we have a really comprehensive funding database called Startup Health Insights, which is free, by the way, if anyone wants to check it out. We're tracking over $7.5 billion worth of investments in the digital health space since 2010. And the deal count has quadrupled from 2010 to 2013. So went from 135 deals in 2010 to 547 deals last year. So that in itself is really significant. But what's really exciting is 71% of the funding last year was seed stage and A round. So there's just a lot of support flowing into early stage startups, and we see corporate VCs looking earlier than they had before. We see more and more venture capitalists that are focusing on earlier rounds, and so for us as big, obviously supporters of the ecosystem, that's very exciting. And that's sort of general, and happy to speak also about specific trends in funding.
Sure. What I thought was interesting, about 2 years ago, I hosted a similar panel at another industry event, and we challenged a number of the investors there and said, what do you think of mobile health? And they all said, it looks interesting, but I wouldn't touch it because I have no idea what to do with it. So yeah. I think the market certainly has changed. What are some specific trends? Where's the money going? There's a lot of different segments in this area.
So big data was the largest number of deals last year, big data and analytics, so 123 deals in 2013. Wearables and sensors were, wearable devices and sensors was also a huge category. And then we saw a third category, which is not a traditional one that people talk about, but AARP is a big partner of ours, and we did a special funding report last year looking at the 50+ market specifically in terms of digital health investing and navigating the healthcare system. There were 100 deals in solutions related to navigating the healthcare system, which Wildflower would be categorized, Wildflower, who raised the Series A in December, would be categorized in that space. And so it really makes sense just conceptually if you think about it, as with healthcare reform, disrupting business models and new, unexpected solutions coming onto the market, there need to be ways to help people navigate all of that.
Yeah, it was interesting because, CES just closed, I think on this weekend in Las Vegas, and they've actually come out with personal wearables as its own individual category now for analyst tracking in this area. Klaus, let me ask you, do you see similar trends in the EU? I've always sensed you guys are a little bit more advanced in terms of implementation in this area.
Well, I think in Europe, the term telemedicine, I don't know how it is in the US, but it's all over the place since, 20 years. If you think about telemedicine, of course, you can also call it mHealth application, but at the end of the day, you're transferring digital data again to monitor or to help treatments of patients. And there are some, I would say, interesting projects on the cardiology side where you do home monitoring of cardiology patients. Also have that in the US, of course, but it was extensively discussed in Germany on whether you can reimburse that. And finally, one or two companies already have obtained reimbursement because they could prove that the home monitoring helps controlling the disease, and at the end of the day also is able to reduce in cost. When it comes down to the wearable things like the jawbone, I also have a jawbone on my hand. This is more lifestyle, I think, thing. And just yesterday spoke to somebody from Sony who came from Las Vegas, and all these devices are all over the place. And you also can buy them, of course, in Europe in the Apple Store. The question at the end of the day, what is the utility, and whether that really goes into the more serious medical application part of it. From our perspective, we are more, I have to say, a hardcore medical device venture fund. So we always want to have decent data generated by a device which help to cure disease or monitor disease. So we are not so much in the leisure devices, but we observe that because it's very interesting, and we are, of course, always fascinated about the venture rounds you can do in the US, raising 20 million and 90 million loan to get jawbone off the ground. So that's almost not possible in Europe.
Right. We have some more questions on that because I think there's a blurring between the consumer side of this and wellness and that. So we'll get back to that one. But I may just put this out to all of you and get your take, because I think whenever you're adding something new, and certainly mHealth is something in addition, so it's more investment that's going to be required. Who's going to pay for this, and how do you get this stuff paid for, and what is the incentive? Maybe, I don't know, I'll leave that open. Who wants to go first to that? Because I think there's no really set answer at this point.
Well, I'm happy to dive in. I actually have a pretty strong opinion about this. I think clearly there's two models, right? There's a consumer model for mobile health that there are some companies that are having success. You have to get to pull that off, you've got to go after a mass market, right? It's got to be like I'm an avid user of the Lumosity brain games, and I know that they have like 50 million users because everybody can use that. It's a great example of like a consumer model that works and can scale, and they have a freemium model, can monetize that. In my business, we're B2B sales, and we basically license our software to healthcare payers, Medicaid plans, other healthcare enterprises, and we have an ROI. And to do that, you have to have an ROI, prove there's an economic and clinical value to those clients, and it's just like any other healthcare software. So I think, in my mind, those are probably the two types of models that are merging. I don't know, Michelle, or other people on the panel, what your view would be, but.
Yeah, I really agree. I think that the consumer versus the payer, and really what we need is more evidence that solutions such as what we offer, such as Medable, actually provide benefit and clinical outcomes. I think that's going to be a key piece to getting payers on board, and certainly we're making progress in that vein, and Klaus can probably speak to that as well.
I think there's a good example here in the US. I think maybe you know this app. If you are diabetic, you might know WellDoc, which is reimbursed. I don't know by how many payers, but last what I heard is 2 are willing to pay $100 or $200 a month for that app, and that it's an interesting observation from our perspective that obviously they could prove the utility of using that application or that app at the end of the day through a study they did, and they could show if you are on that app for a while, you reduce your AC1 level significantly, and that's what you want to have as a control measure in diabetic patients. So it's interesting that app, if you download it, you can argue whether it's a nice, sexy app, but at least from a utility point of view, it seems to be that it benefits the patient, and obviously that's the reason why it is paid for. But if you are interested in that matter, I can recommend really to look at the Price Waterhouse research on that and also on the IMS Health Institute data. It's quite interesting to see who is willing to pay for it, and I think the switching rate on healthcare apps is tremendous. Beyond 50% people are willing to switch, meaning if you want to sell an app, you might get a one-time payment and then the people switch again. So their conclusion is if the utility is proven, if the app is sexy in a way, but the utility first place and the patient or the user is benefiting of it, then they might be willing to pay. The question is how much they are willing to pay, and then it comes down who should pay for it. At the end of the day, I think it will be a combination between the consumer on the one hand and on the payer side on the other hand, if you prove that this application or this app is really making a difference. So I have no doubt that in a couple of years apps will be paid for, and I have also no doubts that digital therapy will be paid for. And there's a great company here in the US, maybe you've heard about Akili, who is using an iPad to treat bipolar disorders, and they're running an NIH financed trial. So think about it, if you could prove that with an iPad gaming kind of approach you treat bipolar disorders. I mean, I don't know whether pharma guys are in the audience, they might not like it, but as a patient I don't care. It's just about that I have an effective treatment, and if I look into the iPad and it's working, of course this will be paid for if you are able to prove that in the clinical trial setting.
I'd also like to add, I think, a layer that hasn't really been tapped entirely is the hospital enterprise itself as a payer for these services, because what I see is that in a couple of years, every patient will connect to the hospital system using their mobile device, and there's not really a great solution for that right now. It's something that we're working on, but I anticipate that connectivity with the hospital enterprise and them as a payer of those technologies will emerge as a strong model.
Yeah. So, Klaus, let's come back to some of the things that you said. So from an investor's perspective, when you're looking at making an investment, you have to evaluate these business models and how you're going to get people paid. And some of them are the direct models, which you've talked about. It's a personal payer model. Sometimes it's reimbursed, but there's also some of the soft benefits, which you mentioned, and specifically related to like client retention and all that. And how do you go about evaluating the true value of that? How does it drop to the bottom line in how you evaluate an investment?
I think the client retention, or the lock-in, how we call that, is the most challenging thing. If you look at an app application, taking into account the study I mentioned on Pricewaterhouse, what the switching rate is. So the lock-in of a patient, meaning that somebody who's at the end of the day paying for something, we felt is very hard to assess. If it comes down to leisure and you have first mover advantage, you have a lot of dollars behind you, like with Jawbone or Fitband, what have you, you might create traction and get a lot of users on your platform, and then you can generate a different business model and make your money. But we as a medical device investor, as I outlined, we always look that we have a device connected to the mobile application, because we believe that if it's a device or a sensor which is really measuring something seriously, if you like, helping to make a treatment of a disease better, then you might not have the problem that at some point, if you prove it's working, you get paid for. So I think the combination between a sensor or a device from a medical point of view with a mobile application, we are moving into that and assessing it with the app application, but that maybe is specific to us. We are not an ICT venture fund. We sometimes do not have the vision of how easy you can place this app in the community and the people stay on that application, but I have no doubts that will happen. But we are restricted our efforts really on the device combination and connective application through an app.
All right, well, let me maybe ask it a little bit more pointedly. When you're evaluating a potential investment, can you actually assign a dollar value to the retention factor, or is that just remains a soft feature?
You can, of course, do market research and ask the people, but that's what Pricewaterhouse did, and
right.
The response was, I would say, mixed. I have to say. I mean, there is an interesting app in Europe. It's also available here. It's called My Sugar. It's a diabetes app. It's a company from Austria. They get traction all day because the app application seems to be very nice and people love it. And the question again would be then how they do make money. they have to build an affiliate model, or they have to get a BGM producer linked up to the platform, so blood glucose monitoring device linked to the platform, and so on and so on. So I think the challenge I would agree is really to find out whether the business model is working with a payer involved, or whether it's a purely consumer model where you think this thing is so great that people are willing to pay for it. I think that's the most challenge we are facing.
Okay. Leah, let's come back to you. Now, because I think it helped to illustrate for the people listening, you have a specific business model in place, and it's interesting because I know you've mentioned a B2B model, but at first blush, if you look at it, it looks like it's a consumer model. Maybe you could walk us through that so we can understand how you're looking at it.
It's a good point. It actually comes back to something Katya was mentioned earlier about the need to help people navigate the healthcare system. And I think part of the reason people need help navigating is the healthcare system is really bad at reaching consumers and engaging them, compared to the true consumer sectors in society like retail and other consumer products. Healthcare hasn't gotten good at that yet. And maybe we'll get better with ACA and some of the dynamics happening. So part of our approach is, and I actually didn't realize this when we started the company, but I'm learning it. Part of our approach is we have a consumer version of our product. We know how to market to consumer. We do Facebook advertising, we do online advertising, and we started doing that because we realized just helping our clients have a mobile application that helps them engage pregnant women and route them to health benefits and route them to provider networks is great as a start, but they need help finding the people as well. And we've built a model where basically through our consumer marketing, we can find women before they've gone to the doctor, before a claim is triggered, and then we can help route them to the programs their health plans or health systems offer that are configured for them, and help them navigate and help basically get high-risk women to the right programs so they'll have a healthier pregnancy, which, pregnancy is the #1 driver of hospital costs, and every pregnancy complication is wildly expensive for all of our clients. So that's the reason why they're willing to pay for our solution. But it's not just because we have the clinical logic and the configuration to get them to the right things that the client offers. It's also because we know how to find and engage the consumers. And I think that's going to be incredibly important for companies that want to be successful with the healthcare enterprises, because it's a value add that a lot of them are looking for, particularly the payers.
So in essence, you're driving the traffic to the subscription model.
Yeah, I mean that's our aspiration.
Right.
We're still in the early stages. We're an 18-month-old company, but
Right.
that is how we're setting the stage with our clients that we're doing that. So for example, in the state of Wyoming, we're rolling out our program to all the Medicaid moms in the state of Wyoming, and we have a version of Due Date Plus just for Wyoming. It's live in that state on Android and iPhone, but we're not just relying on mailers to the Medicaid moms to let them know this program's available, which is sort of the traditional healthcare model. We are literally doing the targeted Facebook ads in Wyoming, the mobile ads, everything to get those consumers to adopt the program, which is a really cool mirroring up of strategies.
Great. Michelle, let's come back to you. Now, your company is kind of a different play. You're a platform-based company, so you actually have a platform that other people build upon to enable their own solutions. Now, is that something you guys do as a fee for service, or do you guys stay involved in the actual operations of the company?
Yeah, so we have two models, and one is licensing of our API to startups and wearable device companies who want that data that they have accessible to a doctor. The other is the healthcare enterprise, so hospitals who feel that the patients should be connected to the hospital system using mobile. And so we really are targeting essentially the healthcare enterprise and the digital health market. It's a pretty large market. I think with one solution, which is what we offer, is essentially a patient comes in, they build a team of doctors. It can cross different institutions in terms of what that team of doctors looks like. And so in doing that, we actually attract a number of healthcare systems because, as we all know as patients, so many of us engage in multiple healthcare settings. And so that's kind of our strategy, is somewhat viral, based on essentially the patient integrating their own healthcare and then asking for what pieces of data they want shared with those providers in those healthcare settings. So, again, we're in the early stages. So far, we've seen some really interesting traction. And I think that it's really patients who drive the bridges that are needed to be made in the healthcare setting, and we're hoping that that will attract new customers for our platform.
So let me ask you a question about that. A lot of the applications we're talking about today, these are greenfield applications, so we're starting from scratch and nothing exists before. In your area or anybody else, do you see, is there a market, or is it feasible to actually retrofit, if you will, mHealth on top of existing healthcare platforms, and where are people doing in that area?
So what your question is can we take existing applications and build in another layer that makes it more accessible to healthcare?
Right, add mobile
setting?
to something that's not mobile today.
Oh, interesting. Like, for example, what do you mean by what's not mobile?
Well, the classic example where you used to have it is, in the BGM market. I mean, that's the place for everybody else. But there's a lot. I think there's other areas where people like gather more data or something. And I know that a lot of, maybe it comes back to you. You're working with large companies who are looking to adopt mobile platforms. And are they looking to do new things? Or are they trying to as an adjuvant to their existing technologies and services?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, large companies are really picking up their activity. The most progressive ones are starting to look earlier than they were in the past. So in the past, I would say large companies would consider a startup a company with 10 million plus in revenue. And now they're starting to really see the value in looking earlier, even pre-revenue, at companies and entering into pilot relationships, testing out sales distribution partnerships, and really just taking advantage of the ecosystem to learn from it and learn from what's there. We have great partnerships with companies like Cleveland Clinic and AARP and GE who are really taking the next step to say, okay, we know there's a lot of value in early stage startups and in this ecosystem, but we don't necessarily know that we're seeing the best of what's applicable to us by just random people pitching us all day long, because there's so many companies out there. And so, for example, 15 of the 50 companies in startup health are the GE class. So we curated 15 companies just for GE based on their criteria of what's important to them, and in this case in consumer health, and what they were looking to learn more about. So now they have access to these 15 specially curated companies as they grow throughout our 3-year program and learn from them and learn new business models, new technologies, where the talent is and things like that. And then they in turn get access to GE leadership and GE scale where appropriate. And so some companies are really going the extra mile to integrate and support early stage for just these reasons.
And what are big companies? Is there an area in particular that they're looking for, a segment of the market that they're most interested in today?
Well, it really varies. So pharma is all saying the same thing. How can we be more than just a drug development company? How can we go beyond the pill and provide healthcare services? So that can be anything from medication adherence to patient engagement and care coordination. They want to be involved in the whole connected health picture. Mm-hmm. Hospitals are increasingly becoming payers. And so they are very, very interested in lowering costs and wellness solutions and integrating those, as a self-insured employer. So it really depends on what type of company we're talking about. But yeah, it's quite a range of interests.
Okay. Yeah.
And I do think you're right in that something not mobile that's now becoming mobile, we're seeing a lot of that in the healthcare ecosystem. For instance, patient surveys. Mm-hmm. We all receive that after visits, and we're seeing there's a lot of interest in making that mobile as an example of more kind of consumer-facing, meeting the expectations of the consumers, for example.
I want to come back to the BGM thing because there's a big fair in Europe called Medica. Mm-hmm. If you go there from year to year, you see the evolution of BGMs from not being connected to now becoming all functionalities you can imagine, from infrared to Bluetooth. I think we are now at the stage of Bluetooth, where maybe next year almost all BGMs of the big players will have a BT functionality to communicate with an iPhone or a smartphone. And then the rest, you can imagine what that means then in terms of patient monitoring, collecting data, and so on and so on. We have invested in a company last year in April, which offers a fully comprehensive diabetes management system, not doing the BGM thing, which is very important, but it's only part of the equation. They also have developed this company, a smart insulin pen, which is able to store the data and transmit the injected insulin dose to a web-based portal. And what the patient then gets back on his iPhone is not only the BGM, because they have also a connected BGM to the system. The patient gets back how much insulin has he injected, when has he injected it, and what was, of course, the blood sugar level before. And the company just have launched a system in Germany. It's fully CE certified. And the health insurance companies are very, very interested in the system, and they already get reimbursement because they could prove a significant improvement of HC1 levels after 6 months, much more than you would see with new drugs coming to the market. Which means if that utility is proven, I have no doubt that you have different avenues of making revenues. The company is selling strips, you make revenues on the strips, also it's not high. You sell a telemedicine service in a way which most likely you get a small reimbursement on, and you sell the full device system, which also not used to be reimbursed. As you know, the insulin providers give the pen away for free, but with a utility attached to the system, you might get even an extra payment because you have proven that you improve therapy. So I think the connecting the different things you need for getting a therapy becoming better or compliance up certainly will get reimbursed, and therefore I think there are plenty of opportunities out there in different areas like asthma, for example, also very interesting business model possible, and other diseases. So I think it's a very fascinating time to invest in connected health startups.
Right, yeah, I've actually been going to Medic for many, many years now, and I've watched this evolution, and it seems like everybody's got a BGM, a weight scale, blood pressure monitor, and then they kind of run out of steam. But it is this integration of data, which is.
But nicely, nobody has such a pen.
Not yet, and I think that's where it becomes a hardcore medical device, and I want to come back and ask you about that. But I think there's a couple, 3 questions which are important that fall out of what you've talked about, and. We talked about CES just ended, and how do you reconcile this situation where you're dealing with consumer electronics essentially, in a lot of these, especially in the wellness platforms, but even in the medical device side where you get into the regulated technologies, and yet the technology is changing faster, often more fast than the regulatory approval process. And so how do you handle that in this environment? Because there's going to be a new iPhone next month, and there's going to be a new this a year later or 6 months from now, and yet the regulatory approval process is much longer than that. So how do you see this coming to conclusion in this area? Because how do you keep up with that?
It's really challenging.
Yeah.
I think as digital health companies, you're not really sure exactly what the future holds to some degree. And I think especially for what we do, we want that data to be accessible to the healthcare system and potentially influence doctor decision making. So yeah, I think there's a lot of questions surrounding it. I think it's very unclear, but I think some of the recent things coming from the FDA provide some clarity around it. Klaus may be able to speak to kind of some of the specifics about digital data rendering, certainly less gray there.
I think the question is what a smartphone does. If the smartphone is do any kind of calculation, algorithm kind of thing, then you probably have much more harder time on the regulatory side.
Well, then it's a device, that's right.
Yeah, it's a device, but if it's just a transmitting station to send the data to a server and the stuff is then done there and it's then transmitted back, you have a different kind of challenge most likely. I mean, in Europe or Germany, the company I mentioned, they had to go to a fully certification process also of the software. But again, there the smartphone is not a place where all the calculations are done. It's just transmitting data versus generating or interpreting data. So that I think is manageable. But you have seen the steps of the FDA that you have 510K apps or you have not 510K apps. And unfortunately, Europe has, if they read newspaper and they talk to each other, it's a matter of time when that will hit Europe as well, that for certain applications you will run through a certification process, which is, as a patient, fair enough. I mean, if you get a proposal to change therapy, you need to know that is in some time has been checked before. So I think regulation is certainly a challenge if it comes down to diagnostic and giving direction on what you do. And that's, I think, fair enough.
And it does serve an important purpose. I mean, we do want the data to be reliable, and I think we do need more evidence around the reliability of the data. For example, I know Airstrip, they were rendering fetal monitoring on different types of smartphones. and it required FDA approval, Android versus iPhone, because you actually need pixel perfect fetal monitoring, re-rendering, for example. So, in those cases, it is critically important that the data is absolutely accurate.
Right, and the platform changes 3 weeks from now, and you got to do it, and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
you got to do it all over again. I think that's a challenge. I know, being heavily on the developer side, that's something we see happen over and over again. A couple other questions are related to that, and that, most of the programs, and tell me if I got this wrong, but I see a lot of these programs, and they haven't fully reached their ultimate scale, I guess, at this point in time. So you have pockets, if you will, of mHealth. But if you take it to its ultimate conclusion, you almost end up with the same Tower of Babel. You talk about the power of integration of data, and now you want to integrate a whole bunch of data, and there's absolutely no standards out there for doing that right now. And what are we going to do to get past that? Because once these things fully scale, and it's possible that a patient and or caregivers, you may have 10, 20 different things that you want to monitor at home. I mean, even if I have a jawbone like you're wearing and a wide scale, and somebody else is BJ, they don't talk to each other. And then when you get into now, you're going to get to the more hardcore medical side. I mean, what's industry doing today to enable, to anticipate the fact that when these things scale, that you're going to have, there's a problem that's coming.
Well, that's an opportunity.
That's what Bill Gates said.
It's an opportunity for businesses to meet that need, and we are seeing more and more solutions, platforms like Medable that aggregate data and consolidate it, and derive value from it being consolidated. So I think that consumers will basically demand that, and you hear that all the time. So I'm wearing a Shine glasses, wearing the jawbone. How many devices can you wear? And then you connect that with all the things that will be coming down the pipe. Things that we don't even think of as healthcare devices will become healthcare devices, like our car seat and mattress and toothbrush, all these things. So I really think will be a huge wave of aggregation and analytical devices to become platforms.
Yeah, and I think the opportunity is not just to harness all that data to have it have appropriate utility, so that it's not Tower of Babel when they talk to each other, so a consumer or doctor can make decisions, but also obviously the holy grail is taking it all and putting rules and statistical analysis over the true big data play to have smarter medicine. I mean, that's, I think it's going to take a long time. I mean, look at, we have Tower of Babel in the legacy systems. Like,
right.
The EMR systems are disaggregated. The
right.
claim systems are archaic. I mean, it's going to take a long time. And I think consumers and providers ultimately have to be stewards for some time of all
right.
the data that's coming in.
And it seems to me, because it's not something that an individual device company can really drive the equation.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to come at a higher level, and
Right.
I think it almost calls for there needs to be some action at a higher level.
Yeah, but you could imagine that you have 2-3 system integrators. I mean, if you think what Qualcomm is doing, and the question then for a startup, however, is how can you brand your product if you have a system integrator having the business model? I think you have then to find out what is the right business model and what you get from the cake if you have a system integrator able to connect, let's say, all devices. We looked recently at one which is want to integrate Jawbone, Fitband, what have you, but as I said, it's not in our focus. But I think I'm quite sure that you also have companies in the US trying to do this system integration approach. Mm-hmm. Just the question is then how the business model works for the startup who has developed that app, or even for Jawbone if they would work with a system integrator of Fitband. But I think you're right. I think giving the emerging devices, wearable devices, I think it's hard to believe that everybody has its own platform, or it's hard
right.
to believe. Yeah.
And it comes back, I think there are a lot of it. I think the industry needs to settle down and learn this, because there's a lot of parallels between the Apple and the Microsoft. In a regulated environment, a closed Apple environment where you have control over all the parameters is very appealing from a regulatory standpoint. And an open standards platform is not from a regulatory platform. And I think, and you see pockets of this, and then when it comes to integrators, I've worked with a number of people who their big concern working with like the Qualcomm at-home gateway, which is just it's a little box that sits in your house and it gathers all the data from all your devices and sends it somewhere. Is there's concern that as the provider of the device on the patient, you lose control of the data now, and who owns that data? And I think there's a lot of concerns in that area. But let me come back. You've used the word, a number of people use the word big data a number of times, and I get emails on big data all the time, and I still don't know what the hell it means. Can you give us an example? I mean, I imagine a lot of people, I'm not the only guy in the room who doesn't really understand, I don't want to put you on the spot, but in 60 seconds or less, what's big data, and how's that going to help us out here?
So big data, I'll give you an example, just a really basic example. So say you're a hospital administrator and you're tasked with ordering medical supplies. There's data that exists all across your hospital indicating who's using what and how much and what brand is preferable and what department likes this and what are the outcomes, and they're all sitting in different databases. So in this one simple application, if you can come up with a platform that can integrate all these different data sets and analyze and come up with an answer to that question of what should this individual order, that's a real world application of big data and analytics.
Okay.
It's more of an anecdote than a definition.
Well, there's a lot of, in some of these things, there's a lot of chatter about it and a lot of talking about how it's, the new wave of technology, but it's difficult to get a definition of what it really is. And I guess, let's come back to that and, let's open it up to everybody. But if you go look at the latest Price Waterhouse report, and they talk about, they project by 2017 it's going to be $27 billion, $22 billion business, I forget the exact number. And 2/3 of that is expected to be remote patient monitoring. It seems to me that's where everybody can agree, remote patient monitoring. Well, who's looking at all that data now? I mean, what are you going to do with all that data?
I mean, it comes back to what you said and kind of to a point that Katya made earlier, is that these different pieces of data from wearables to implantable devices are just aspects of yourself as a person that need to exist holistically for someone to render health care to you. And so the goal, I think, of big data, whether it's genomic data or sensor data, is to really paint a holistic picture of a person that thereby someone can interpret and understand physiologically to render health care. I think that's where we're hoping to head. But again, it comes back to your piece of data standardization, data aggregation, and really also analytical layers that combine real value data like a heart tracing with a daily weight. And these are actually different pieces of data. And I think when you think about what does big data mean, it actually means combining different types of data that might exist in waveforms to numeric, different types of data, and having analytical layers that combine that together. But that's where we're going to be painting digital pictures of what it is to be human, and where as doctors will be able to interpret that in a meaningful way to provide real holistic remote care.
Yeah, I think the problem with the big data term is too many people use it, right? And there's
like mHealth, right?
Yeah, it's and a lot of people talk about big data who are really small data, right? Like my company has a really smart analytics plan to take all the mobile data we're getting, combine with claims data, but it's still not really big data, right? Like it's not what I've envisioned of, like you're saying, different types of data sets and anyway, I think that there are some interesting companies in the space who will help us figure out what to do with it. But I think the problem is going to be, and I heard someone articulate this really well at a conference recently, is when you do have all this data, I think we may have more sort of spurious conclusions being drawn. And what's really going to separate the wheat from the chaff is the technology exists to go cull the data, figure out how to get it. To separate the wheat from the chaff, are the people who have the right mathematical and statistical models to actually make sense of it, and to create products that have the right logic, that are actually based on the right math and statistical analysis, because I think that's going to be maybe where the holy grail is.
Right, and I asked that question because I don't know if any of you guys were at the recent mHealth conference in DC, and they talk about this, and everyone had clouds, and everyone had data monitors, but no one talked about what you did once you got that data trapped anywhere. And that was never mentioned by anybody during the technical discussions or, on the show floor. And I thought that was interesting that no one really has talked about what do you do with all that. And the other thing that I want to ask you guys about is that the other thing that you see is that at that conference in particular, strong emphasis on what I call wellness products, the things that you're wearing and the thing that you're wearing and the Fitbits and all these kinds of things. So there is this blur because a lot of those devices actually have legitimate medical applications when you interpret the data in a specific way. So there is this blur. Is that something that's going to be allowed to coexist? I mean, if I buy my Fitbit and now I'm going to use it, the doctor's going to use it for a diagnosis, shouldn't I expect to get paid for that or get reimbursed, or the hospital's going to give these things out one day?
Definitely, I think employers especially will be moving in that direction.
Right.
And I've seen several instances. I know the Cleveland Clinic has something they call the Pearl that they give out.
That's the Cleveland Clinic.
Right, but they're a leader, but people follow them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I think with wellness products, it's a challenge to sell them to consumers only because there's so much competition in the space. If you can get into a B2B model there and get some really great entrenched sales relationships. I think that's really a holy grail for wellness solutions. But yeah, in terms of where's the money going to come from? If a payer, for example, sees that wellness solutions are going to reduce costs, they're going to be willing to pay for them. I think that's one avenue.
Okay.
I think in Germany we have some examples on corporate insurance companies. So there, I don't know how it is in the US, but in Germany the big companies like Siemens have own health insurance companies in Siemens. So if you are employed, you get a health insurance insurance from Siemens. So Siemens is not the one I'm talking about. There are others who using this kind of wellness thing to not to control patients, but to encourage to live a better life in terms of activities. So I don't know whether they use Jawbone or Fitband or whatever, but I know from one project where actually they give away these devices for free, and then you can log into a community, so to speak. And what I've heard, then you start creating competition, running, and it's kind of community in a community. So you're employed in that company, and then suddenly you are in a community sharing your data, like how many steps you have taken a day and all these things. At the end of the day, what is behind is not, I think, controlling the patient. It's rather really to encourage them to be more active at the end of the day. And I think that's fair enough. And if a big corporate is paying for it, me as a company owner, it's great. I mean, you should buy 100,000 Fitbands, it's great.
Yeah. Well, I think something that's really important in wellness, though, is solutions that are targeted at people who aren't always really engaged in their health. So it's one thing to come up with the better design for somebody who would spend $100 on a Jawbone or a Shine or Fitbit. But we've got a company in Startup Health called Get Health, and they're really targeted at people who aren't already engaged. And so their customers are wellness programs, and it's supposed to be designed for mass appeal, right? So there's 1,000 people in your company, and they can really dumb it down and make it very simple to say, I drank X number of glasses of water, I had this many servings of fruits and vegetables, and I think it's important when talking about wellness to think about people who aren't already engaged, because the early adopters are the ones making all the noise, and they're the fun ones those solutions are the fun ones to read about, but that's not actually targeting the big problem of obesity and heart disease and all these things.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the challenge, because the old school, like health risk assessments and all the wellness programs that have been in place for years and years now are having trouble showing an ROI, right? There's all this data questioning whether they really make an impact. So now you're adding more cost to it by putting a device in. So how do you do it in such a way that you target the people that are really going to move the needle in cost? I think it's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the trends that I've seen is that it's got to hit the person who's going to use its wallet. And I think insurance companies is one area in which we see a lot of movement. And they're just beginning to embrace the technology of consumer monitoring. We've all probably seen on TV where you can actually, some insurance companies for automotive insurance will give you a device you plug into your car, and it tracks your speed and your braking and all this, to make sure you're a good driver versus bad. And you actually get money at the end of the day if you comply with their guidance. And I think I've seen some insurance companies in healthcare beginning to examine, how they can use that in order to encourage people to, entertain a better wellness program so that their cost as a payer go down. So we're getting close to the end of time. Let me just open it up to one more question, and then we'll see if there's any things in the audience. If you look, I don't know who wants to go over. If you look ahead 3 to 5 years, where do you see us 3 to 5 years?
I see that as patients, I think we'll all connect with the healthcare system with our mobile device. I think it'll be a conduit for both data shared with your system, with doctors in the hospitals, and also an avenue for you to receive ideally more efficient and effective healthcare. So I think it's what I'm really excited about maybe in the next 3 to 5 years.
Great.
Yeah, so I really look forward to prove that digital therapy is going to work. If you're matching using a device, giving you some stimulus through a screen, behind there is an algorithm with different patterns, triggering your brain to improve, and that showing to prove in the clinical trial. In schizophrenia, by the way, there's a professor here in the University of San Francisco I recently had a talk of, who is treating schizophrenia for the last couple of years with a game on the iPad. It's not mHealth, but she uses an iPad for the game, and she has tremendous data to bring people back away from schizophrenia. I think in 10 years now, maybe we all have iPads or whatever devices, and if we have an issue, a mental issue, you can think about Alzheimer as well. Get your connectivity in your brain back, and that I really look forward that is being proven.
Well, it seems like if you make a game out of anything, people
No,
in
it's
this
the
country will
game is
adapt something.
the game is just that you are not bored about any strange patterns on the screen. So I mean, I have another example, by the way, on using a game. People who are kids who are asthmatics, they have to inhale, but they don't like that. There's a company who has combined that with a game, and if you inhale, a chicken is jumping while you inhale, and when you use the inhaler with that game, the kid is sitting there and is going to inhale. It's very simple, but that's not, I mean, hardcore medical treatment, but on the central nervous system, I think I really, that's, if you ask my question, in 10 years, hopefully it's in 10 years that we, because then I maybe have also some disorders, so I want to sit in front of my iPad and won't sit there an hour and know that I get a treatment.
Are we all going to be wearing something 5 years from now?
No, I don't
Okay.
think so. Actually, I think it's going to be maybe 10 years. I think everything in healthcare takes a lot longer than we think it will. And if you think of the 3 to 5 year time frame, my best hope would be we have, in 3 to 5 years, the sort of best practices established for both digital health innovators and large companies of how you integrate digital health, what's the right business model, how do you prove its impact. And at least we've got a few success stories there. We might hope in 3 to 5 years.
Great.
I go back to the connected health idea. At the mHealth Summit, I stopped by the Kaiser booth, and they had this really cool demo that sort of walks you through their ideal sort of patient experience, all the way from a woman finding out she was pregnant to delivering and the post-delivery care, and just all the different potential, and some were conceptual and some were real, devices, and solutions that could touch every point of that journey, and how that could be connected back to the provider. So I think, that's already starting to happen, and we'll see that formed more solidly. I also think genomics will factor in there. One of the the first startup health company to be acquired was genomics company, Arpeggi. They were acquired by Gene last summer, and they're a DNA sequencing company, and they're making it really, really cost effective to get involved with personal DNA sequencing and deriving value there. And I think those will be also integrated into the whole health picture.
Great. Julie, we have time for a question or two?
I think we heard the question. How does the regulatory environment impact?
Badly.
I think it depends. Like for my company, based on the current FDA guidance, there's no impact today because we're not diagnosing. We're basically care management made better using mobile, right? But for other companies, it's I don't know, Michelle, how it impacts your company or some of the companies in your portfolio. But
Yeah, I mean, I think again we're kind of in a gray zone, but it definitely, you can look at it two ways, right? You could look at it in the sense that if you approve FDA approval early, it might be a strategic advantage. I think that the FDA does serve an important role for patient protection. And for example, there was a study out of Mayo that looked at Fitbit in post-surgical care. And it showed that you could use Fitbit data to kind of determine whether or not someone was doing well post-operatively. And when you start to use that data in a clinical setting, we do need verification that it's accurate. So, I think it serves an important role, and in a sense, there's kind of early adoption of what will probably be needed, which is FDA approval, might be advantageous to startups. And the 510K isn't cheap, but it's doable. I think that but it's hard to know whether it's a worthwhile investment at this point.
I think the regulatory environment is very significant for startups who are seeking FDA approvals, and it can prevent a company from realizing the true potential of what might be an ideal business model. They would maybe go after a secondary business model while they're waiting for FDA approvals, and they really have to be nimble and get creative for what markets they can target based on approvals. So we certainly hope those cycles speed up.
Right, and I'd add just a couple things. That one is that the FDA is still learning as well, so they don't always know how to regulate some things, and so it's part of our job is to help educate them on what to do and what's the right thing to go do. And I think the industry has also just finished a phase right now where a lot of people did silly things. Klaus mentioned if the app does medical things, it does calculations, it does more than transmit data, that now it's a medical device. And you just can't do that unless you're in a very, very rare situations. And so FDA sent that letter out, recall, I think it was 70 some applications, and slapped a bunch of people on the wrist. They never should have been doing what they were doing. And so I think you have to just follow good practice too. And do that. I think we're getting past the phase where people know the awareness of an app can be a medical device. You got to be very careful to watch that.
Mm.
Hi. How can you protect the user, the end user, to make sure that the data being transferred back to the manufacturer is protected?
From a security
From a
standpoint?
security point of view.
Yeah, I can speak to that because that's kind of what we do, is really protect data that's coming from a patient's mobile device. And HIPAA outlines a number of standards that are kind of best practices, but it's actually implemented in a number of different ways. So for instance, if you download our Medable app and you connect with your doctors using our system, and you use your mobile device phone to take a picture of your skin and send that to your doctor, we do all sorts of things from encrypt the data that's in that application on your device, take that image and not store it in your camera roll, encrypt the data when it's in transit, and encrypt it in storage. And so, when it's implemented in best practices, there's a tremendous amount of data security that goes around that. And I actually think one thing I anticipate in the next couple of years is, ideally, as consumers, will be more vigilant about the level of protection that our data, our health data coming from our phones needs. And so there's certainly many ways from a technology standpoint that you can implement pretty adherent and strict data security parameters.
Yeah, I think that it's an issue that hasn't really been addressed yet fully. And and the reason I say that is because a week doesn't go by that you don't get some news report of some very large company who's got their credit card database hacked into, or their user account database hacked into. And these are companies with a lot of resources and really are trying with due diligence to try to protect those kinds of things from happening, and yet they continue to happen. And so I don't think we're there yet. And I think that is another thing that if you read the reports, that's one that, if you list the top 3 barriers to adoption of mHealth, the concerns about security is one that always pops up on the list.
Well, I think there are ways to, as you were saying, in the first place, take precautions so that if your data was hacked, there wouldn't be any compromise of patient security. So one of our companies is called AdhereTech, and they've got a smart pill bottle. So when the patient opens the pill bottle, take their medication, data goes to the cloud about what time it was and how much they took, and it measures how much is left in the bottle. But that is decoupled with it's just a number and the amount, so it's not the name. So there's separate sets of information, and the name and the medication information, they're never sent in the same way to the same place. So even if there was a hack, they've already prevented those kind of breaches. So the HIPAA, the guidelines are there to set up those kinds of mechanisms.
But I think where you see many more issues is in the way in which healthcare providers and patients use their phones today, because they're super convenient, where there's just no protection, there's not a lot of thought around it. Like, it's not uncommon. I just wrote a piece actually on text messaging your doctor, right? So when you're using standard methods for that type of communication, there is no data security there.
Yes.
Aside from what an iPhone offers, which actually isn't bad, but it's not what it should be.
Questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank our panelists. Thank you.
Do you have a card?